Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that is passing wisdom to the next generation of athletes, coaches, and parents to transform leaders on and off the court. And in today's episode, we get the privilege and opportunity to interview Heather Henson. Heather has been a soccer coach at the Division I level for over 20 years, and now she is in the recruiting space, helping young athletes get recruited to play college sports, not only soccer players, all players. And we talk about how to do that for young athletes. So a lot of great tips and wisdom. We actually dive into, how to, play connected as a team. So a little bit for the coaches, a little bit for the parents, a little bit for the athletes. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast, Heather. I'm thrilled to have you on and share those nuggets that we were just talking about right now with the audience that's listening and with each other. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Justin. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. And, Bridging Impact's all about transforming leaders on and off the court, about how sports have an impact on our lives. And so, can you just share your story of, soccer and as a player and coach, and what kind of impact has soccer had on you? I know it's a super easy softball question to start. Right?
It is. Thank you for lobbing that up. I appreciate it. Honestly, I thought about this question, throughout my youth career, especially into college and into coaching. In college coaching. And my dad always taught me to give back, right? To give back to the game, to give back to people. And, he would give his time and attention playing with me in the backyard. He eventually coached me at some point. He gave me an example of giving back, not only coaching us, but also playing soccer. He played in an adult league as well to figure out, okay, if I'm going to coach this, I have to jump into it. Taught me a lot about really, what does it mean to give back? And, it was a sport that I was lucky enough to play through my youth, was lucky enough to play in high school, and then get an opportunity and really just truly be blessed enough to get the opportunity to play in Division I college soccer. And, that resonated with me. My dad's give back always was just in my head. And so it was like, but what does that look like, right? What does that look like as a college player? Because, you're doing your college thing and you're in your own college sport. And so then as I got to my senior year, right, junior and senior year, and started going, what am I going to do with my life, right? I love sports, but at what point does that end for you? And so then it was like, okay, I'm supposed to give back to the game. That's what I've always been instilled. And I've had amazing mentors with that. And so I wanted to do what they did. And I was lucky enough, right, that sport can help, can be a profession. And not just on the soccer field. Luckily for me, not just on the soccer field, right? There wasn't a women's professional league at that time. And so I went into college coaching. And the world of soccer as a player, as well as going into coaching, really being as a player, you were allowed to and encouraged to be a strong, independent young woman. Right? It was okay to have two personalities, right? Be the nice girl and be that good person of good character off the field. But on the field, you could be aggressive and competitive and have a voice, right? Because you needed to either organize your teammates or respond to them because they're telling you, you have to mark up on a player. But you have to organize your team, right? And you have to listen and communicate. And so it really taught me I need to have a voice, and I'm allowed to have a voice. And it's not yelling or complaining. It's how a team links together, and it allowed me to see what a strong female looks like, because I had some really great mentors. As I mentioned, Janet Rayfield is one of those. And she's still in the college game right now, right? She's the head coach at University of Illinois. And so her mentorship, our college, the college I went to, UNC Greensboro, they had a female assistant who was on the women's national team, the first one that won the World Cup, Lori Henry. And so I had some really great female role models as well as male role models that allowed us to express that. And so those are really, those big pieces. And then my dad has continued to resonate in my head as a college coach, give back, but what does that mean? It's not just X's and O's. And so I just continue to keep those people right sitting on my shoulder or in my head, just resonating those thoughts constantly.
That's a great place to jump off, because giving back is what I feel like, a ton of coaches I've really pride themselves on. It's like that blood that runs through all of us, that we love the game so much, whether it's soccer, whether it's basketball, baseball, and we want to be able to give that back to the kids. And you bring up an interesting point around having a voice, and I think I'd love to kind of expand on that. And like as a college coach, how did you emphasize that as part of your teachings, to help players have a voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think females across the board, right, have to be aware of this, and sometimes they're hesitant, and sometimes they're over energetic, right? And it's finding the balance of it. And a lot of let's use freshmen in high school and freshmen in college, right? Because there's 3 other classes above you, and that's a scary time to have a voice. How do you have a voice as the youngest on the team? And so for us, at all of the colleges I was a part of, we really tried to make sure that we were providing opportunities to use your voice. And quite honestly, sometimes that was, we would pick out players who are going to communicate, who are going to organize the defense, or going to organize the forward line, right? And so it may not have been the captain or the center back who's traditionally great at that, but it was a younger player or a different position that may not have that big of a voice role. So we literally pick out players on the field in training, right? Who's going to run warm up? Sometimes it was it wasn't always the ones that you expected. We would purposely call out players to do that. And then off of the field, one of the things that we did that was really, really important, and I didn't do it until Tammy Matheny, one of my really good friends, and she's like, why don't we try this exercise? And it was phenomenal. It was basically helping us realize what do I need from you, right, as a teammate, and how do I respond? How do I respond in good and bad, right? And then how I can relate with you better. And so one of the best examples I give you is, I think on every team I've had at least one of these players. It's that player who, man, she knows the game and she is vocal, and she's going to say, step, you got to defend, step higher, right? The urgency of the game is calling for that to be said with an intense voice. Well, there's somebody on the field that may take that personal. And so it's helping them go, we have to help both of these people. And so we did this exercise away from the field, right? Away from a training session. And it's helping, let's say Sarah to voice and say, hey guys, I know my voice can sound mad and ornery and just irritated when I'm telling you to step in defense. She goes, I'm not. It's the urgency of the situation. So when I'm doing that, please understand, I'm not mad at you, and I'm not mad at you. I just need you to do it. And if you want to respond and go, got it, then we're linked together that much quicker. And so I always said it before I met Tammy, I always said, listen to the content of what is saying versus the tone and how it is said.
That's an interesting point. And I think I would love to, kind of expand on, the purpose of, having some of these exercises and dialogue off the field, like off the court versus like on the field and like diving into it right at that moment. Can you talk about how some of these different exercises, right? Like bringing in Tammy, like for the mental game performing, and then, leadership activities, and how those really help tie in, because I think a lot of times when I think about coaches, they think about, there's only so much time. I got to only focus on the X's and O's and the skills that, we need to develop. But and coaches know that it's important, right, to develop, the leadership side of things, the mental side of things. But can you talk about how, some of these communication, exercises has really helped actually to X's and O's and on-field performance?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, we had a season with one of my college teams where we started off not on the winning side of the record at all, right? It wasn't because they weren't working hard. It wasn't because they didn't know the X's and the O's. It wasn't any of that. It was just getting them on the same page and linked together. And so we as coaches, we want them to be perfected and mastered the X's and O's, but how do we do that? And what are some of the not complaints, but what are some of the things, the struggles that we have as coaches? It's like, oh, they need to talk more. They need to connect more. They need to organize more. Well, communication, listening and talking,
Right.
and somebody not being afraid to step up with that voice. Because a leader, one of my assistants years ago, she's so wise, Val Heisinger. She said, it's not always it's not the leader, it's the first follower that is critical, right? And so I kind of blend those together. I think you need that one person who's willing to step up, but they know that they have a supporting person right with them, right? That first follower, because then that reassures, my teammates aren't going to take that personal. I can do that, and they will receive it in the right frame. And so, that year we didn't start out, right? We started out 1-7-1. We ended up on a roll, 7-2-1. Won the conference tournament, played in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And quite honestly, is because we had some great leaders who really used their voice in the right ways, but used their heart to lead their voice. And that was because we did things on the field, but also invested that time off the field with simple exercises, right? It doesn't mean you have to go in a classroom and sit for 30 minutes or an hour. Sometimes we would go in our training room and spend an extra 10 minutes, but they were nuggets that they were feeding on consistently.
And it's like seeds, right? Where you're planting them, and then, the more you talk about them, on the field, on the court, right? It's like watering those seeds, right? And like being able to help them connect, when playoffs come along and then the tournament comes along, and that's when the teams can be flourishing. And with that, you kind of bring up a great point about just connecting with teammates. And it's so much bigger than, the one-on-one, and because I'm not super sure what the highlight world looks like for soccer, but I'm sure it's a lot of goals, right? Just like in basketball, they show a lot of, and so you have to kind of get that team buy-in to get everyone to, kind of row in one motion. So with that, I'm curious, getting everyone on the same page, how have you approached that? I think it was an interesting point talking about the follower. And I actually think, the first follower is oftentimes a leader, because it takes a little bit of humility to be like, okay, right, I'm going to let my guards down. I'm going to let, player A lead us. Right. So I was just curious, what are some other, tips for coaches to help their teammates get on the same page?
Yeah, I think I think vulnerability, right? Having the discussion about vulnerability, but also reminding yourself as a coach and reminding your players that we're human. And so we do make mistakes. And I think, right, fear comes from vulnerability, which comes from fear of not wanting to be vulnerable. Right? It's just a crazy cycle. And so I think it's put it in the room. It's an elephant that's sitting in everybody's brain. And it's okay to put it out there and allow that space to sit, right? And acknowledging, as a coach, I can think of a handful of times, way more than that, but right now I can think vividly of about 5 where I literally looked at the team and went, that's my bad. I didn't give the right game plan, or I set this drill up completely wrong. And so letting them know it's okay to fail, because I failed you for a moment. Now we're going to change it, right? Because I don't want to keep doing that. And so I think showing vulnerability, I think showing character through that. I think being able to do, I think when I think of teammates connecting, there's 2 stories that I have, if you don't mind. One of my players, Tara, she's actually now an assistant athletic director at a high school, and she's in the administrative side, but again, can't get out of athletics. And she had a handshake, or a pregame, not over the handshake, but a pregame activity, handshake or high five or heel clicks or whatever, with an individual one for each player on our team, not just the starters. Every single player, and Tara knew every single one of them. Like, she made a point to go, this is Belicia's, this is Sarah's, this is Coca's, right? And would do that before every game, even if she was starting and they were on the sideline. And another example I have is a young lady on our team, again, all conference player, right? She had all these accolades, so everybody could look up to her alone on her athletic success, but she didn't hang her identity or her hat on that. her goal was to make sure freshmen coming in all felt comfortable. And so she had one freshman one year that she was struggling to connect with, right? Because honestly, we were coming out of COVID. So it was like, what are all the rules? And so she looked at me one day and she said, I got this freshman to talk to me now. And I said, okay, awesome. She goes, my next goal. She is going to ask me to go to lunch before we leave for Thanksgiving. Right? And so she had to get enough of a relationship that this freshman was going to ask this upperclassman, hey, you want to go to lunch? It sounds easy, but it could be the scariest thing for a freshman. And I was, yeah. And sure enough, it did. And she the next day I saw her at practice after it happened. She goes, guess what? I got a lunch date. Right. And so it was so rewarding for her, not because she accomplished her task, but she now has a freshman who's opened up enough, right, to have conversation and to really, again, connect, because you connect more. You know, if it's a middle school team, they go to class together. If it's a high school team, they have some classes together. But what do you do off of the court or the field that lends to success on the field, I believe?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely a believer in that. And that it's so nice to have a super connector on your team like that who really cares about, right, giving back and making sure that the underclassmen feel like they belong on the team. And so finding maybe for those coaches that are listening to be like, okay, maybe I have player A might be able to, kind of bring someone along. And I can share actually a similar story about a buddy who played on my high school team. And apparently I didn't know this until like this last winter when we were all sharing stories together is my buddy Geronimo, he was a freshman. He was a freshman on varsity, and he had transferred from a different school district to our school district. And so he had no friends. And our varsity baseball coach asked one of I think he must have been a senior at the time, to take this kid to lunch, to take Geronimo to lunch. And that's something that Geronimo, obviously still talks about, and something that's really important to him. So like, honestly, it's just encouraging that lunch aspect of things is huge, especially for, newer players, underclassmen, whether it's, collegiate or high school. And I'd love to kind of shift that gears to talking about like high school and collegiate and talking about the recruiting process, because I know you've kind of, shifted your career from going from collegiate coach to now you're helping, athletes with getting recruited, and not just soccer athletes, all athletes. And, from just starting from square one and kind of going from where we talked about before, like what are the first steps when you meet a young player, young athlete, whether they're in eighth or their freshman year, like what kind of are the first steps to getting recruited and playing collegiate sports?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, first and foremost, right, they have to sit down with their parents and go, do I want to do this? Right? Do I want to be a college student athlete? And there are so many different opportunities and so many different levels. And so the time demands are different at the different levels, organizations, and that's okay, right? Because it opens the door for more people to play. So I think you have to, first and foremost, you have to ask that question, right? Is this what I want to do? And if it's yes, but I'm scared about time management, okay, right? Then it's then going, okay, what do I need to begin to do, right? And most people will say, this is a conversation you want to have, your eighth grade year, your freshman year. And every sport recruiting timeline is different, right? And recruiting rules have some differences. And so being aware of the basic rules for NCAA, NAIA, junior college, and you can find those on the website, right? You can do some Google searches. I mean, that's the great thing about technology and the web for us, is we can find a lot of information. We can also find a lot of misinformation too, right? So it's about being intentional with our connection points in our education. One of the other things I recommend is that we have to figure out what do you want? How far away do you want to go from home? What do you want to study, right? What part of the country do you want to be in? What type? Do you want to go to a state school, a private school, a Christian-based school, right? So kind of diving into who am I and what's important to me. And that's going to be what I call the North Star, because then that gives you, it may not give you the final school's name, but it gives you the direction we're going in, And I think you need to make a list. A lot of people have dream schools, and they just think that's going to naturally happen. And if it doesn't happen, then they'll stay close to their local school, right? If they really want to play college sports, man, let's put a big list of schools together, right? And what I do, you got to have a reach school, where like your dream schools, a target schools, and then safety schools, and make that list bigger earlier, right? Because the process is then you're beginning to whittle it down as you begin the communication and the recruiting, the deeper into the recruiting process. Then that big number, say 20 schools, finds its way. You add some schools, you take schools out, and it eventually gets to top 3, right? And for me, I think the goal would be if you could find a top 2 or top 3 schools, and it was like the littlest thing that separated them on your pros and cons list, then you can't go wrong, right? They both would be great schools for you. And for me, man, that's the hope. That's the ultimate goal, is helping families analyze the student athlete. Who am I? What do I want? Educating them and their families, and then empowering the student athlete to use their mind and their voice to take action and ownership of this recruiting process to find their school, right? Colleges, they're not going to come knocking on your door, because there's a lot of colleges and a lot of student athletes, but you have to put yourself out there. You have to market yourself. You have to showcase. You have to highlight you, not just highlight films. You have to highlight you. Can I communicate in an email? So, but those would be the first big steps is right, do I want to go? What region, what part, who am I, right? And then beginning to put that list of schools together. Those first major steps, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And I'd love to dive into a little bit more on the who am I and why that's so important, because I don't even think I even thought about that. When I think about the recruiting process, I think about, is there a school that's offering me? Let's go, right? But there's more to it, like we had in our conversation before. And, as a small town person, do I want to stay in a small town, or do I want to, kind of go take the leap and be in a big city, and can you talk about, maybe share some stories or, some of the processes that you've had, recently with, conversations with young athletes, trying to help them really figure out what the right area, what the right type of school is for them?
Yeah. I honestly, a recent conversation that I had, one comes to mind, is that, she watches, college soccer on TV all the time, and she's just been a soccer junkie, right? Which is awesome. Like that's awesome. We love gym rats, right? So she wanted to play at the highest level she possibly could, right? And so we started that process. She's emailing with schools. Well, one of the conversations I had with her, we talked a lot about where does playing time fit? Where does, she'd answered those questions, but that was a while ago. She forgot, right? But it was like, okay, so, as you're getting responses or not getting responses from school, let's dive a little bit, let's bring up that topic again, right? And she's like, oh, Heather, I want to play. I want to play as a freshman. And I go, okay, well, why? And she goes, well, I think that will, it'll set me up for success later on. And so as the conversation evolved, I said, okay, so what happened? What would happen if you didn't get that playing time you wanted as a freshman? She goes, I think I would be upset. I think I would struggle. I think I would be unhappy. Right. And so we went on to some other topics. Eventually we came back about 2 days later. Right. And I reconnected with her because I wanted to see if that soaked in at all for her. Right. And so we reconnected again, and I said, okay, do you remember you talked about this? So we went through it again, but now we dove into it deeper. Okay, so the Power 5 level that you want to go to, like, that's not what you're saying you want to play. That's not the level, right? This is the schools. These other schools on your list, these are your target schools, because these are the ones where you could find yourself in that role and really being an impact as a freshman. So yeah, it's a difficult conversation, right? Who wants to say you can't play at this level? But it wasn't me saying that. It was your goals and your dreams don't match right now. Yeah.
Right. No, that's a really interesting point. That's exactly what I was hoping to, kind of learn a little bit more about, is because I think, because especially like everyone wants to go Division I. Doesn't matter what sport it is, just sounds better, right? Division I, Division I. And I had a good conversation with another dad the other day that was, we were talking, and Division II. There's a lot of great basketball players, great soccer players that play at the Division II level, right? And you know what, you may get some more play time. So how often do you have the conversation around, the levels that people want to play at? And I know it's really challenging, especially in today's social media society. You want to put Division I athlete in your bio, right? But, do you want to play, right? Like you're talking about. So, how do you help, athletes, kind of process through the divisions?
Yeah. I think I talk a lot. I ask a lot of questions, right? I always was that as a coach as well. And so, right, I kind of center it around, what do you want? I always go back, why? What are you looking for? And so one of the simple things I say to them, there's a national champion at every single level, right? Junior college has a national champion. NAIA has a national champion. Every NCAA Division I, II, and III has a national champion. They all have conference champions. So you can be a champion. And so on your Instagram account, does it have to be a Division I school, or is it just going to say I'm in blank conference champion? Maybe 4 straight years because I went to this school. Yes, you're exactly right. There are some phenomenal, and the reality is, in each of those levels, there's crossover where they can have great competition against, right? Let's say there's national champion and really top 50, let's say top 50, top 100 Division II teams that can compete and beat some Division I teams, right? Like that's how close it all is. But yeah, there's champions at every level, and I remind them of that so they don't get hung up on it. And I remind them if there are people, I ask them, right, did your parents go? Did they play? Do you have friends who went to another school? And trying to find, because more than likely they know someone who went to a non-Division I school and played some sport that they admire or respect. And it may have everything or nothing to do with the sport. It may be a pastor at a church, right? Played college baseball at a Division III Christian school or something, right? And then you're like, but he is an amazing man. I love his guidance. Well, he went to a Christian college and they competed for a baseball championship, right? But he went to college, and look at the man you're talking about. So it's things like that. Try to relate it.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. And as I kind of think about, the different divisions and the process, I'm curious, as a coach, right, you're able to have, kind of that extra layer of like what you were looking for, in recruits. And now you're able to help that for those athletes that want to be recruited. For those athletes that are parents and coaches, and maybe even the select few athletes that are listening, what advice do you generally give athletes to stand out? And I think you brought up a couple of points around, reaching out, showing initiative, and kind of just your, you got to market yourself, but can you kind of dive in a little bit more to the marketing aspect of it?
Yeah. Right. What do college coaches want? Part of our job is to win games, right? And again, depending on which level you're going at is where that places a percentage, right? A higher value. But the reality is every single coach, even Division I national championship teams to any other level you can think of, right? They still want, they want the athleticism. They want what I call I call it soccer IQ, right? The IQ of the sport, right? So your sport IQ, your knowledge of the game. We all want skillful players, right? But we have to have people of good character, right? And good students. Because as a college coach, if we know this is a young man or a young lady of just great character, that means they want to fit and they want to have a team culture and they want to compete and they're going to be selfless. Because college athletics, if you're a starter or not, you have to be selfless, right? And being a good student, if you can balance being a student athlete, right, you're going to have stressful times. But the reality is it won't be as overwhelming. There's times and moments of it, but it won't be as much, right? So then it's going to allow you to play more free with those pieces, And so I think that those are some elements of what college coaches in general are, right? They have to have, right? The sports side specifically, but then these intangibles of who that person is as a character, who they are, what their character is, what's their value on academics.
Right. So specifically as a coach, like how do you find that out about an athlete?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is one of the pieces that I encourage my clients, right? Communication. I'm not going to know as a college coach unless I have contact with the student, right? But I want that contact to be both ways, because that's going to help me to know their interests. And so we have to have touch points. We have to have contacts, and that could be emails, text messages, phone calls. But right, can they have a conversation with somebody who is a coach who is 5 years older than them? Can they have a conversation with a coach who's 15 years, maybe 35 years, right? Like that's the big piece. So that was always a big thing for me, is I'm going to find out about this young person from getting to know them. And when and coming on campus, I want to meet the parents too, because parents are an integral part of this, because they help go, yes, I want you to, honey, this is the right place for you. Go ahead and go, right? I feel comfortable as your parent to say yes. And so I think that, because our parents know their children better than anybody else, good or bad, right? However you want to phrase it. And so for me, I think that's a big piece, that you as the parent and the student athlete, is connecting with the coach. The parent supplements, right? But the student athlete drives it. But I think it's important because it helps us to understand what are their family dynamics in terms of values, right? Like if I'm on Tara and I'm coaching her, how is she going to respond, right? Like if she got grounded at home, how does she respond? Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, no, those are fun questions to ask, and that's kind of the off the court, kind of the character side of things, but character also shows up on the field and on the court. And so, like when you're watching a game, what is the kind of like, and I kind of feel like I have a general sense, but for those that are listening, like in detail from coach's perspective, college coach's perspective, like what are the little body languages, like what are you watching for?
It's a great question. Body language is critical. I actually went to watch years ago. I went to watch a young lady play, and I went to watch her. Well, watching her, this other young lady caught my attention, and that's going to happen, right? That's going to happen. And they played two different positions, right? So it wasn't anything in that sense bad, but their team was losing by 3 goals. And when I watched this other young lady, she caught my attention. She caught my attention because they're losing, but she was lifting her team up. She was on the field encouraging, come on, guys, we got this. You got this. Good first touch. Like she's encouraging. Now she's on the ball and she's magic, right? Technically, I loved her, right? She was so technical and smooth and composed. But in the midst of her game being so solid there, she was giving to others instead of getting frustrated that they weren't winning and getting frustrated that she didn't get a pass to her. She was saying, we can still do this. And so, right, when I think of body language, hers was the complete opposite of, oh, really? Hers was like, let's go. So it was that, as Tammy calls it, it's that Superman pose in the midst of playing. Like she had her shoulders up, her head up. She was just empowering her team with her body and how she was playing the game, but also her voice. So those are critical. We recognize that. Those are when they're substituted off the court or the field. What's their body language look like? Are they upset because they get pulled off, or are they going, okay, high five, next one in? Those are all important things that we recognize. That's why we go watch you play in person.
Yeah, that's so funny because, you're talking about you went to go watch someone specifically and then you find someone else, right? Another person of great character, obviously, similar skill sets and obviously understands, that soccer IQ, kind of the coach's checklist. And I haven't had that kind of perspective myself, but I do, feel like that's a really important point for athletes to listen to. And I know that as a conversation, one of our assistant coaches, he really works well with a lot of the younger athletes on our varsity team that want to go and get scholarships. and, just working on body language when you come out, right? Are you, does it look like you're, for lack of a better term, like cussing out the coach because you're coming out, or are you like coming off the court and, staying locked in? And is it consistent? So I think that's the one thing that I try and work with athletes too is, are you just putting on a performance because coach is in the stands, or like, are you there all the time? And I know there's that clip. I'm not sure. I forget which coach it is, but she's like, I'll go to a game where I'm watching their team just beat up on another team, like they're up. I will watch that play and see how they interact on the bench, right? Because in a game like that, the quote unquote, the star player, the player that's going to get recruited is not going to get as much play time. So are they interacted? Are they engaged, or, are they checked out?
Yeah, it is so important. It is, I think, right, there's so much more value in showing your overall character than just showing your skills in your sport when you're getting recruited.
Yeah, the character part is, and that's what's really going to carry on, right? Like you talked about, your former athlete, and now she's in administration, and now she gets to, kind of like we started the podcast with, give that back, right? And just continue that cycle. And I think that's what we're really in it for as coaches, is to continue to give that back and teach them about character. That I feel like sports really is the best vehicle to do that. Like I interact and engage with quite a few people, and I can tell, like who has played at least some sports, whether it's like middle school is when they stopped, or, all the way up to collegiate. But I just feel like there's just some lessons that sports is just such a great vehicle and ground to teach. And as we kind of wrap up the, end of this podcast, like what would be your final like words and pieces of advice be for those that are, wanting to get recruited at the next level, and for the parents and coaches that want to support them?
Yeah, I think it's important that you utilize your support system around you, right? If it's your high school coaches, if you're playing in a club, a sports club, a specific club, go to those coaches because you probably know someone that you have way more advocates than you think you do. Right. And it's around the sport itself. But as I use the pastor who was a college athlete, right? That is an advocate for you because he can help you to understand what being a student athlete is like. And I think going and asking, right? So many people don't want to ask because they should know, right? They should be able to look it up on the web all by themselves. And I think that being vulnerable enough to go, I don't know what I don't know, but here's what I want. Here's my goal. Who can help me get there? Because, man, this country, our heart is in the right place. Like, I believe that everybody, if they get asked of something, most people will go, what can I do for you? Let me stop what I'm doing. What do you need, right? And it could be a financial ask. It could be just time and attention. It could be knowledge from experiences. And so we just need to ask, right? And then those of us being asked need to go, you know what? Somebody helped me once before. So it's my turn to give back. And so I think asking the question, right? If you're going through it, right? And some of it may be, connecting with people like me, right? There's recruiting services. I'm not a recruiting service. I'm more of that consultant. Like, I'm going to guide you, but I'm going to hold you accountable because I want to teach you those skills that will take you through life. But again, there's a lot of options out there, and some you have to pay for, and some you can get that starting point by asking your closest advocates, in your local sports, your high school teams, your churches, your neighbor. Maybe your neighbor 3 doors down that you don't know, y'all get to know her, and you realize, wow, she was a gymnast in college or something, right? Yeah.
The support system is huge, and that's really important. And I also would, kind of double down on what you say about ask, because that is something that's really helped me for the podcasting world, right? Asking people to come on the show, and then asking people like Tammy, who then ends up connecting me with 30,000 people that come on the show, right? And that continues to kind of trickle down. But that asking things has been huge, in my personal life, post, right? Sports world, kind of like what we were talking about. And, I love that you kind of, again, tied it into giving back, as, people like, yourself, like you're here on your own time, giving this back to those, parents that are listening, and coaches and athletes. And so those that are listening and want to connect with you and learn more about your recruiting services, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So my website is h2athleticadvising.com. And I have Facebook, I have Twitter, and Instagram, the same thing, H2 Athletic Advising. And those are the best ways. You can go to my website and get my email address, but my email address also is heather@h2athleticadvising.com. And I do a free 30-minute consult, right? Because sometimes it's just, they don't know what they need, and I can give you a couple nuggets and you might roll with it and be great, right? And so I want to provide that too, because again, my goal is to help as many people as I can. Now that I'm out of college coaching, now I can help more people, right, navigate this whole recruiting process.
Yeah, you can continue to give back to the recruiting process and, bring that coach lens. And there's just a ton of wisdom today. And so I really appreciate you sharing all those, nuggets. We started with the coach side of things and then kind of went towards the recruiting side of things, which is perfect. For me, as someone who's helping a lot of young athletes, high school athletes, it's important for me to understand more on the recruiting side. So this was great for myself as well. So I continue to kind of give that back, and hopefully, they one day will, continue the cycle of giving back and bridge that impact, hopefully, reach the mission of the podcast. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact podcast. We'd love it if you would subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.